Hi, I'm Jake Burkett from Grey Alien Games, and this is a quick video about something I just coded for Forbidden Solitaire. So, for those who don't know, Forbidden Solitaire is our latest game that we're working with Night Signal Entertainment on, and it's a horror solitaire game. And it's actually kind of set in two time periods. You're actually playing the game as a protagonist called Will Roberta in 2019. And you've just been to a thrift store and found a CD-ROM of a 1995 banned game called Forbidden Solitaire, and you take it home and run it on your computer, and then you play the game and stuff happens. So I'm not going to go into more than that, but what I wanted to show was what we've got is two aspects of the game. So there's this sort of modern looking kind of Windows-like UI. So this has all been programmed by me and art made by Nick. From Night Signal, and then there's the old part of the game which you play, and again that looks very DOS-like, but what we wanted to do was make the transition from the modern to the old really kind of obvious and sell it to the player. So what I've done is I've coded this kind of fake DOS boot sequence, CD-ROM boot sequence, which I will show you now before the Heartblade interactive splash screen comes in. So this is what it looks like. And then you get the splash screen with a cool riff that I made in the 90s that we've repurposed. And then you get the intro movie. If I click through this, you get to the title screen of the 1995 game, which has got a different resolution, a totally different vibe, and then there's the game itself. And from the game you can exit to DOS, which is what the game thinks it's doing, but you come back to the Windows screen. So I'm now going to talk about this little DOS sequence and how that works and how I made it happen. So the first thing I did was, I've got Photoshop loaded up here. I made a fake kind of command prompt window, and to start this off what I did was make a 640 by 480 black box. That's the kind of resolution that our game is supposed to be, and that was a kind of a common DOS resolution, so was 640 by 400. Okay, and then when I'd made this, this top part here, this top part is actually from a messenger system we've got in the game, which I can show you actually. So if I press escape to bring up a dialogue, you can see we've got this sort of upper window and box with a drop shadow, and it dims the background when that pops up. We've also got, if I reset the profile here, after a couple of seconds a messenger app pops up because your sister's supposed to be messaging you whilst you play the game, as she goes and does research in the background about the game and the studio behind it. So I used this as a basis for the DOS window. I've kept the X button on it, though actually you can't close it during that small sequence. If players try to, it won't work, but that's okay. It's just, I don't think many people will try. So what I did was I made this dialogue. When I'd made a draft of it without this icon, I took a screen grab, and then that icon is the screen grab. And to get this font on there, I actually went to a cool website. Let me just check what they're called again. int10h.org, which I think is probably some important address for like old school PC coding. And I found a lot of DOS based fonts. So if I have a look at this font, it's not really doing much. There we go. We've got this font here. There's loads of different fonts, but I specifically chose a VGA font for DOS, which was sort of appropriate for this time period and for this sort of screen. So yeah, so that's what I typed this with. Then I also turned that into a bitmap font for in our game to display as all the text appears. So anyway, let's go back to the game now. So I'm going to pause this and we can look at what happens a bit. So when I click this, the first there's two phases to the DOS boot up, and the sound's going to just keep playing anyway. Oh, by the way, I got the sound from freesound.org, and I filtered to CC0, Creative Commons 0, and found a really good sound that I was able to sort of boost in volume and chop the bit out that I wanted and so on, and time it to the sequence. It won't be timed if I pause. So this is the first bit. So it pops up with a dialog that says OS prompt. You notice that wasn't on the Photoshop, and that's because if I move this screen over here, excuse me, oh, and let's just check something here, DOS1. Okay, yeah. So this is a text file I've made called game text, which is basically for localization and so on. It's just so that no strings are hard baked into the game. And OS prompt is the label, and that's the English version, and that could change later. So that's what you see above at the top here. And then the first bit of the text appears here. We've called it FS-DOS, Forbidden Solitaire DOS. And then it shows a CD-ROM device name thing. And I basically researched, I mean, I used to be around in the DOS days, and I used to load games in the 90s. So I know what it kind of looks and feels like. And I did research kind of what DOS was like booting up then, and then also what some games were like booting up them, like Doom and Duke Nukem and other such things. So I wanted it to show a CD-ROM thing, and then it shows a few more things like the sound card configuration, and this is a sort of authentic set of settings for the sound card, IRQs and DMAs and stuff. And then there was often some kind of memory you would have to have in DOS to make DOS games work. It used to be very fiddly, in fact, setting up games for DOS back then. You had to fiddle with config sysc and autoexec.bat, two sort of key files. And mine used to have a menu in them. So when I booted up, I could decide, did I want CD? Did I want mouse? What did I need for particular games? What type of memory did I need? And then there's a little command line here that says, normally you just see the C prompt, you see. But then it's as if this game or the batch file that's running this game is typed D:, which is a common letter for the CD-ROM drive back then, and then forbid.exe. And again, file names couldn't be longer than 8 characters, so that worked quite well. So this is the first stage, and you hear the CD-ROM sort of kick in at the beginning, and then it really spins up when you see the exe. And the second phase, it's got this red bar across the top, which is reminiscent of sort of what games would do at the time for their sort of loaders. And Heartblade Interactive is actually the company which has published Forbidden Solitaire back in the 90s, and there's more about them in the game. And then it checks a few things, command line parameters, loads in some default starts as keyboard and mouse, allocates some screen buffers, important for double buffering. And then we've got this loading bar, which loads with these dots going across. And then when that's done, of course, it kicks immediately with no fade. Normally my game fades between transitions, but this kicks immediately into the splash screen as if to indicate the game has gone full screen, and now we're sort of properly in DOS. So I'm going to just go out of this back here. Now that's it broken down, but one of the things I wanted to do was make the bits of text appear over time, so it's not just a single screen. So it feels like there's a delay between each thing, and you can sort of see that a delay between each bit pop up, and then a nice loading bar like that. So I think that really helps, excuse me, quitting that again, the tone. Let's go and have a look at the code. So, excuse me, we're going to, there's OBS and everything. Okay, so, I should actually just quit the game. So I've got this class that I made called FS-DOS, and it is kind of like smoke and mirrors. One of the things I did, well, I'll explain how I draw everything, but one of the things I wanted to do was make it authentic as possible. So I got that DOS font and I exported it at various different sizes until I could fit perfectly on 80 characters. So I used that as a test string in the window because 80 columns was a thing back then. Then I've got various parameters to set up the label at the top, and then the border for where the top left of the black square is. That's where the text starts drawing. There's a line gap and so on, right? Now, what happens when this dialog loads? Load is called from the title screen. It just loads in that image that I showed you in Photoshop. Actually, I don't want that. I'm going to close that down so I don't accidentally overwrite this file with this silly text. So yeah, it loads in the image, it sets the X and Y for that image. It creates a thing called an animation, which is a class I've made a long time ago. If I look at my code, a T-animation class, which handles phased animations. So then the initial phase is 2000 milliseconds, so 2 seconds long. Then I add a couple more phases, This is the DOS screen type phase. This is the screen with a red bar across the top, and this bit here handles the dot 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 for the loading bar. So, and then I load in the CD-ROM sound. So it's actually pretty simple code. Oh, this code, by the way, is in BlitzMax. Not a lot of people have heard of it. It's a tool that came out in 2004. I started using it in 2006. And it's a basic-like language, but actually it's, I guess, closer to C Sharp, really, in the way it works, because it's got sort of automatic memory management and stuff, garbage collection. And it sits on top of C++ libraries. So I really like it. I've used it for a long time. And it's funny that this language was actually made closer to the time our game is set, 1995, than now. I mean, it's, 20 years old, but it's still very solid, runs very well on Windows. And we've used it for pretty much most of our games, except for one in Unity over the years. So yeah, we load in all the assets. And then when it's drawing, I start this animation. So when it's drawing, what happens is two things occur. I separate logic and drawing. So there's some logic code which just sort of says run the animation, basically. And what the animation would do is it will tick an internal counter forward until the phase is finished, and then it will start the next phase and so on, right? Actually, I don't need that print statement anymore. That was me debugging. So there's a logic phase, and then there's a drawing phase afterwards, and that's because your logic may not be in sync with the rendering, and that's the case with our game. The logic may actually, I run the logic for our games at 200 FPS, which I know is a lot, but there's various reasons for that, and then it outputs at normally 60, but it can do it different depending on your monitor setup. So there's a draw function. It dims the screen. You can see it dim the screen before it draws our special window image. Then it draws the title, the OS prompt. Notice it gets it from game text, which has been loaded in when the game boots up. It finds a particular string and draws it. You might think, oh, find string is slow. It's not iterating through that. It's using a thing called a map, so it's faster. I could cache that, but there's no need on a modern PC. In an old PC, absolutely, I'd have cached what this string was. Or in fact, I wouldn't be drawing it every frame even. Okay, that's a whole different topic though. Then we want to check the animation, and I've got a function called reset cursor because I do have a text X and Y coordinate, and there's a little function here that just, where is it, reset cursor, just sets that to be the top left of the black area. And it is jammed up against the black area on purpose because that's the way the command lines work in Windows. There's no fancy border or anything. Where are we? So yeah, we reset the cursor, then it checks the animation phase, and it will draw differently depending on the phase. Now there's loads of different ways. I could have coded this and people would have taken different approaches, but this is the way I chose. So in phase 0, it gets the progress of the current phase. So this will return a number between 0 and 1, which is quite handy. And then what I do is I always print DOS line 1. And if we look at DOS line 1, that's the FS DOS 1 and the CD-ROM driver. So it's like it tells you you're in DOS, and then straight away it sort of loads the driver. So that always appears. Then when the progress is over 0.25, meaning a quarter, it draws a blank line, and which just advances the cursor. And then it outputs the second part, which is sound card configured and so on. Then when it's close to that 0.35, it does the third line and so on. And then towards the end, it adds the command line to load the executable, right? So they're not equally spaced out in time to indicate that, some things happen faster, some things slower. So that gives it a more sort of realistic feel. And then in phase 1, which is the next screen with a red bar at the top, again, I get the progress. I'll come back to this line in a moment. So I draw a red bar, I get the header, and then there's a bit of clunky code here, but it basically gets the game name and version number. So that will change actually as the version number changes. It pads it to, this is a special function I made here. It pads it to put it in the middle, basically, because it's centered at the top. So that's all this code does. It's a bit fiddly, but where are we here? Yeah, it pads the name, puts that in the top, then it gets the next line down, which was the Heartblade Interactive, pads that and puts that in the middle. And let me see, I might actually put a space in there. Yeah, sorry, that just helps me for readability. I mean, I've got some comments, but not a whole load because it's pretty obvious, this code, what it's doing. Everything's got nice function names and so on, and variable names. Then it always prints DOS6, which is checking command line parameters, inferring that sort of happens immediately. Then after a while, it prints these other things. And then I pretended it took longer to allocate the screen buffers. And then if progress is greater than or equal to 1, meaning this phase has sort of finished, it basically will show the loading bar, which isn't, oh no, sorry, yeah, loading data, which it writes, and then the loading bar in the next phase, but that's just text above the loading bar. Then phase 2, there's 0 base, so that's really phase 3. This is the last one. And what it does is it always draws phase 1, so it draws everything it drew before, and that's why I had this line saying if the current phase is greater than 1, set progress to 1, meaning it just draws everything. So it's a little hack. It's not very clear. I should probably comment that actually. I'll do that right now. So hack to set progress to 1 when drawing phase 2. Yeah, that's fine. Maybe actually I sometimes put very small comments on the end of a line, but when they get a bit longer, I like to put them above for readability. Okay, so phase 2 is going to draw all this stuff above. Then it gets the progress for this current phase, which is 0 to 1, remember. I've decided the length of my progress bar is 40 dots. I could have been the width of the screen, but I think it looks quite good, just 40. 20 might have been a bit small and fiddly. And then what this does is it works out how many dots you need for the current progress, and it creates the dots. And then it works out how many spaces you need after that. Why do I need spaces? Because I wanted a square brackets at the beginning and at the end. So the middle bit is dots and spaces adding up to 40 characters. So that's what this code does. It's a bit fiddly. My print line should have probably just taken a string, but it actually takes a string array because some of these have multiple strings. So even though the progress bar is just a string, I had to convert it to a string array and pass that in there. Which is a bit fiddly. I could have made one called print line array and one called print line, I guess. But this is a game. I'm not developing enterprise software here that's going to have to be reused by many people. Like this screen isn't going to be reused as far as I know. And if it is, I'll adapt it then rather than coding ahead for some mythical future when I need to reuse this in some different way. So this is quick and dirty code. I should have said that at the beginning. So yeah, that draws the loading bar. And when it's all done, it kills out the animation, which is a class. Where is it? These are my own classes, game, image, and so on, and the rest are variables. So you don't need to null out or clear ints. That's fine. That will get handled automatically by the garbage collector, but I do need to null out the animation and the window, which is an image. I'm calling GC collect kind of these days myself, which just manually collects everything now rather than waiting for it to sort of collect it in a second or two, because actually what is happening next is we're loading in an FMV, and that's going to take a certain amount of memory, and I really want the memory cleared before that happens. So I think that's it, basically. It's only a very small class. Well, some people would call that a large class, and that's called by my title screen. Sorry, this is the wrong code, title screen. So if I go in here, I've added a field called FS-DOS of type TFS-DOS, which is the class here. And what happens is the title screen will, let's just look for it. Yeah, it's got some code to draw it. There's lots of other dialogues the title screen can draw, but it draws it here. It will kill it when the title screen is killed, meaning free up the memory. It's my silly name for doing that. And then more garbage collection there. And if it exists in this function called manage dialogues, it will process it. And when it's finished, what happens is when I forgot to say this, when the animation fully finishes, it returns 1. In fact, actually, I think it's supposed to return 1 in there. as well. No, actually I forgot about this. This returns 1 every time one phase finishes. So yeah, this okay, this works. Really, I could have put further down here. If it's finished, return 1. Could put it further down. Doesn't matter though. It still works. So yeah, it just manages it, and there's somewhere it creates it in the first place and loads it in. That's it. So it's very simple and it all works. So I will show you one last time, and then now you've got some insight how it works. So I could have done it differently. I could have made the text display in a different way, or handled the timings differently, or made some kind of very nice class that handled all the text and you know, was future proof, but there was no need really. This was simple enough and worked quite well. So I'll just show you one last time. So there's the first screen. In fact, I can pause that. You can see it all appear. Here's the second screen. There's the loading bar with the code I just showed you. So that is it, and that is Forbidden Solitaire. So if you're interested in this game, please wishlist it now. Coming out soonish. There's still quite a bit of work to do. More devlogs on the way. Thanks for watching. Bye.